a little bright, wide-eyed there for a minute, but college football nerds here with apparently the only named people that I can have as a co-host is Josh. My Josh, Nerd Josh, is out. So I got Josh Pate here, and obviously everybody that's watching this already knows who he is. So we're pretty excited to have him on. I've got late kick merch because Pate has yet to put anything on the store that involves late kick pajamas. So that's what we got. We're going to talk a few games this week. Going to get some thoughts from Josh Pate. And Josh, let's get into it. Y'all going to see me fumbling with this the whole time, but let's get into this and start a little Ole Miss Bama. I think it's impossible to talk Ole Miss Bama without talking about what happened Saturday with Bama. You got killed a little bit for your comments on, suggesting that maybe they took the day off. And I didn't take your comments as anything like saying the team had completely quit or there was anything nefarious going on. But that's just basic human, how the brain works. If you feel like your guy is unfairly sitting the bench, or you feel like you have a better chance to win with your guy, human psychology says you're not going to play as hard. So I'd love for you to expound on that a little bit, and just as we walk into this Ole Miss Bama discussion with just some high level thoughts on what you saw Saturday.
Yeah, I don't even get how it's controversial, honestly. I thought, and I did get what I thought I'd get. A lot of Bama folks agreed with it, but there was still a sizable portion of the fan base that said, "Oh, that's ridiculous." And to be clear, for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, I think, and was also echoing the sentiment of a lot of coaches who texted me, also thinking there was a good enough percentage of that locker room that didn't like the quarterback benching of Jalen Milroe and reflected it in their performance. I thought they gave far less than max effort. There were individuals who played with their hair on fire, but individuals play with their hair on fire all the time on 5 and 17. So that doesn't matter.
Right.
You got to have a collective effort that we've come to expect from Alabama. No one in their right mind could watch that game and think you got max effort from that team. If you did get max effort and that provided a 17-3 win over South Florida, then you might as well hang it up this season. So I'm going to choose to believe what I observed, or what I thought I observed, was true. And that right there is interesting because that's obviously bad. Culturally, that's a reflection on some things that may be a little bit sideways. But also, what have we seen before? 1,000 times. We've seen teams click in week 3 or click in week 6. It doesn't always happen in fall camp, even with the talented team. So this Alabama team, I think this Ole Miss game, it'll be on the national radar, but it's on my radar for reasons other than it's just the SEC opener. This is Lane Kiffin's opportunity to get the biggest win of his career, obviously. It's also an opportunity for them to reinsert Jalen Milroe, for every player on that Bama team to take what's being said by people like me personal and to play with a mission, which we really haven't seen yet this season. I don't think the ceiling on this team is as high as in years past, but look around the country. If this team plays to its talent level potential, they can still win a lot of games. And so does that start Saturday? Like that's what we got to try and figure out.
Round these parts, we'd like to talk about Occam's razor. And Occam's razor says the simplest explanation for something is usually the explanation. And in this case, look, either you choose to believe that a 90% blue chip ratio team is going to struggle. And this is where I kept trying to frame this for people that were disagreeing with you, disagreeing with me. I'm like, look, it's one thing to struggle with a team on the road in the rain, even though I think it was a bit of a partisan Bama crowd. It's one thing to struggle in that scenario, look sleepy. We've seen that from Nick Saban teams before. It's another to not be able to get a first down.
Yep.
And that's the difference. They could have put, I say this all the time, I got a decent arm. They could have put me out there and got first downs. Like that's the thing that to me stood out a little bit different. So the simplest explanation is either you think that a team that lost by 17 to Western Kentucky, who lost 63-10 Saturday, and gave up 24 to an FCS school the week before, you think Alabama's that bad, or something else is going on. Also, if anybody looked at the tape because everybody's like, Tyler Buchner's terrible, which, he played terribly Saturday. And I think that he was a little bright, wide-eyed there for a minute. But if you look at the tape of him, even in the Marshall loss last year, Marshall's a good defense. Even in the Marshall loss last year, he looked like Tom Brady
Mhm.
compared to what we saw Saturday. So again, the simplest explanation is, to me, they weren't playing max effort. I'm not saying they're trying to throw the season
Nope.
for their guy, but I'm saying they weren't playing max effort. And it's clear that even with a bad quarterback, Alabama should have won this game by 30, 35 points because that defense was playing right.
Yeah. Also, two things. So here's what's funny. Some guy came at me with Occam's razor last night to disprove my point, and I'm like, Buddy, you're making my point better than I did. You're just arriving at the wrong conclusion." And secondly, you talk about, well, I call it the freeze point. You guys have different terminology to talk about the same concept on this show all the time. But when you bake in statistically a data set and what you expect that to bear out on the field, there are some things that aren't supposed to be variables, like effort level, that ended up being a variable the other night. And when you don't have max effort, there is no basement. Like, there's no floor to how bad it can look. Alabama's floor, as you just mentioned, their floor against South Florida with max effort should be a 25 to 30 point win. That should be the floor. Instead, we saw what we saw. And so it was a shock to the senses. And now we got to figure out whether that's going to be a theme or something we look back on and say, remember when?
So I want to quickly turn this around to you because I think it's really interesting that if you saw that, and this also I think is informative on what we think we saw Saturday. Bama's favored over Ole Miss 6.5
Mm-hmm.
points. I mean, it may have changed a little bit here and there, but I think the first line was 6.5 points. To me, that says Vegas knows something, obviously, or it thinks that there is a Bama baseline, there is a Bama floor that we went way below Saturday, and they expect them to come back, which I think also supports what I think we saw Saturday.
Yes. And the other thing is, contrary to the college football public's opinion, talent level matters greatly in the formulation of these lines. And even with what happened Saturday, there was a knee jerk. The knee jerk is taking this future line from Bama minus 11 and a half down to Bama minus 6.5. There was a knee jerk reaction. It's not going to go from Bama minus 11 and a half to Ole Miss minus 3. That's not going to
Right.
happen. And the other thing is, I would love to have an alternate universe where people who are just boom, 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 up and down week to week, I'd love for them to open a sports book and put out numbers that I can bet. I would love that. That would be thoroughly
Right.
entertaining to me. So, I mean, you followed Bama for a long time. We've all watched Bama for a long time. It's ultra rare to see them as under a touchdown favorite at home. Ultra rare. And for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss to be coming in there and to have that designation of upset alert, and it's going to be a big money line dog play, I think, for a lot of the country. It's fascinating because there's this other world now. There's this other world where Bama plays with their hair on fire Saturday, and they call
Right.
a game plan that is conducive to Jalen Milroe's skill set, and they blank Ole Miss because that defense is quietly looking pretty good for Alabama.
So the defense is looking good. I'm curious what you think though about Sanders coming in, transferring in, which may have really hurt Oklahoma State in your predictions. Didn't win the starting job, which to me might say something about Jaxson Dart. It might say a little bit, negative about Sanders that the other Josh has said for a while. Offensively this year, they haven't seemed to be as cohesive as I think they have been in the past. And I wonder if it's a little bit relying a little bit too much on Jaxson Dart. I'm curious what you think in terms of like this Alabama defense facing this kind of offense. Is it a little more like Texas or is it a little more like somebody else?
I think certainly Ole Miss will commit to the quarterback run more than Texas did, and I think it's. I mean, Kiffin understands that's going to be an integral part. You're going to have poise and precision at the quarterback position to beat Alabama. Pretty much everyone who's done it has had that, but the mobility factor and utilizing it, should I say, at quarterback, that'll be a weapon that he incorporates Saturday. And listen, make no mistake, when Kiffin knows he's got 2 or 3 quarterbacks on his roster, he couldn't care less if that kid gets hurt. And I say that very calloused, but it's from a strategic standpoint, it's not going to be something that they take into account. They are going to go reckless abandon style with Jaxson Dart, and he'll be fine because he's a competitor. So the other thing is tackling on the perimeter. That's something that we've seen shades of Alabama being better at this year, and just yards after catch. You can give them underneath stuff. If you can just limit yards after catch and force them to beat you down in the red zone, I don't know that Alabama may not look at that and say that's advantage us, but it's the explosive stuff. It's yards after catch. It's a 5-yard pop pass at the 40-yard line, going 40 yards for a touchdown. That's the kind of stuff that swings this game. And then the other thing that we don't know yet is what's the number? That's always a fun game to play. What's the number Ole Miss would need to win this one? Well, dude, it turned out South Florida needed 18. So like, what's the number for Ole Miss? Is it in the low 20s? Or is this game, the Bama would force them to play in the upper 30s? It makes a world of difference, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw that 11.5 number, I was like, oh, so they expect Alabama to score 12. Like, so one other, before we get into Alabama personnel, I'm curious what you think about, I know Judkins hasn't been, I don't think he's been 100% this year, but does it concern you a little bit? You know, I think that a lot of people like to put Kiffin in a little bit of a box and think of him more as a passing offense, which is not. It's a running offense. And that's kind of what we've seen with Tennessee this year too, is yes, they threw a lot last year, but it was because they were able to run. Does it concern you a little bit? I'm looking at Judkins this year, 2.8 against Georgia Tech per carry, 2.7 versus Tulane, only 4.6 against Mercer. And it's not like he's only carrying it 4 or 5 times a game. I mean, he's got 44 carries this year at 3.3 per. What do you think there in terms of, like you mentioned, they're going to run the quarterback more, and they ran him a lot against Georgia Tech. But at some point, doesn't Ole Miss, for their offense to function at a high level against good teams, need the running back room to kind of carry that load?
Yes. And that's where the deceptive results of the season so far come in. So to go back to the Florida-Tennessee game. So I was fortunate enough to be on the side of Florida this last game. And I thought that the country had not watched Tennessee. I think they had just seen some big numbers Tennessee put up, and they just assumed they're bombing away on people. And that is not Tennessee this year. That's not their offense this year. I think similarly, no one's watched Ole Miss. I think they saw the Tulane final. They have no clue the quarterback was even out. And then they saw this Georgia Tech final, and they think that they ran it up on Tech, and they don't know it was a 7-point game midway through the fourth quarter. And they think what the preview magazine told them. Your default position is Quinshon Judkins is one of, if not the best backs in the SEC. They're winning. He must be carrying them. Watch out, Bama. Well, they are winning, and he has played. But Kiffin himself has said he's been a game-time decision. Like, he hasn't been right. I don't think he's right yet. And so, yeah, I think it's a big concern because if you tell Alabama, you know, instead of Jaxson Dart's running ability being a complement to their offense this week, it's actually going to have to be what they lean on because Judkins is not a guy who can beat a team like Alabama right now. Yeah, that inverts the thing entirely. That's also going back to the entire premise of how people pick games. You got a lot of folks out there who are going to bet their money that they earned Monday through Friday on Ole Miss this Saturday, having never watched Ole Miss. It will be an anti-Bama play. Like, it will be an auto fade of Alabama independent of who they're playing. They could be playing air, and people would just take the points with air. So that's something interesting. It also could be that, you know, Judkins is on a trajectory that has him 90% plus for this game. I mean, I don't know because I'm not in their training room, but I wouldn't expect to get a 100% version of him.
So it's interesting to me because, and even I heard it this weekend too, like Alabama always struggles with running quarterbacks. That's not exactly true. They struggle with sort of exactly what you said. They struggle with a passing quarterback who can run.
Yeah.
And Dart can throw. Like, don't get me wrong, Dart can throw. But if you're coming in saying we're going to run our quarterback 17 times this game, and we need him to put up 150 yards on the ground, that's a problem. Like, that's what you need is someone who can effectively throw. And I'm not sure that Ole Miss has, I don't know that they've seen a defense like this. Even in playing Alabama in previous years, I don't, under Kiffin, I don't think they've seen a defense like this, which is interesting because it might kind of inform on our score. But the question for me, one, I don't think Ole Miss is going to be able to score. I don't know that Alabama is going to be able to score, regardless of who plays quarterback. There's maybe Milroe got benched Saturday. Maybe they're trying to figure something out at quarterback. But if they, there's two of thought here, really, taking quarterback off the table. Left tackle is a problem for Alabama. Like that's pretty obvious. Late in that game, they started doing some things to help Proctor out. Tight end sets, running pistol. They did some things to help, which having offensive linemen out, I think, was a problem too. But if you can't protect the quarterback, especially irrespective of if it's Simpson or Milroe, you're going to have problems because both of those guys can throw it, but their processing speed just isn't there. So they need a clean pocket. Look at every single one of Milroe's bombs, right? They've been with a clean pocket. All those interceptions have been too. Ty Simpson Saturday showed, like, I saw some highlights of him. He was not seeing the field quickly enough. A lot of those sacks were on the offensive line, but a lot of it was just him not seeing the field. So knowing all of this, do you feel like Alabama can figure this out in 1 week with the team meetings and the offensive line getting fired up again? Or is this a situation where we're looking at a really low scoring game?
I think it's a low scoring game. No, I don't think they, when I say they click, I think even in the best of worlds, them clicking is find a way to get to 30 and you have to crawl over broken glass to get there, and you let your defense work. Like that's clicking to me. I mean, if they could promise me that they just run the ball semi-effectively and stay committed to it over 4 quarters, that should be enough. And take your deep shots on your play action. Law being out at wide receiver, I shouldn't never say anything singularly hurt them against South Florida because it shouldn't matter. But the way Saban talked about him in postgame, that was a guy that they depend on right now. Yards after catch is really big with him as well. So I think just a mentality being in the right place would be a nice little shift and give them enough offensive juice to win this game. It's also imperative that Milroe starts and is put in the driver's seat of the kind of car he's capable of driving.
What if, I'm going to let you play QB whisperer here for a second before we wrap this one up. What if they tell Milroe, or do you think they should tell Milroe, look, we know you're going to throw an interception. We know you're going to throw 1.5 picks a game. Get that out of your mind. If you throw a pick, you throw a pick. But what we can't have is 3 or 4 stalled drives in a row. Like, is that something you think they're telling him? Because I feel like, especially under Nick Saban, Alabama quarterbacks in the past, you remember when Jalen Hurts, the year he got benched, everybody's like, he only threw 1 interception all year. But offensively, they were incredibly ineffective. I feel like at some point you got to have these guys playing without that fear of turning the ball over, because 1, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and 2, the death by 1,000 cuts of stalled drives is way worse than 1 turnover here or there. Do you think they might take that approach with him, or do you think it's just protect the ball, try to grind out 24 points best you can? Like, what do you do there if it's your job?
I don't know if it's ever expressly disseminated. I think it's just kind of understood, and that may be the vibe that's understood in the room or in the building right now. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know, because I don't know what he's already been told. If I can know the messaging he's gotten to this point, then I'd have a half decent opinion on what to fix. I just think that it shouldn't be overlooked when they came out of the Texas game. Even in post game, I was actually standing there in post game watching him answer questions. And I'm not saying he looked like he had won, but he looked unfazed totally. Like, he doesn't look like a guy who the moment is too big for him mentally. Now, he may just make mistakes, but I don't think he's a guy that you have to worry about the psyche of, if that makes any sense. So I don't know. I don't know what my messaging would be to him. My messaging would be, go play the way you know you can play. That would be my message.
All right, we got to move on because we got a few games to cover. I'm gonna pick this one. I'm not gonna ask you to make a pick because we're trying our best not to step on late kick toes for later programming in the week, and we're on the same platform. So, I've got Bama winning this 24-20. I think the defense is elite this year, and they've been put in some bad spots. Like the Texas game, people forget that was like 13-10 in the fourth
Yeah.
quarter. The dam finally broke, one of which was they handed them the ball on the 5-yard line. The offense did. I think that this is going to be a low scoring game. And by the way, isn't this what we saw, I think, a couple years ago with Alabama and Ole Miss, maybe 3 years ago? 24-20, Bama doesn't cover. You might have some insights on the score. I'm not asking you to pick the score, but what do you think?
I think you're in the ballpark. In fact, I will tell you. So the model we like to use, which has this year's data in it, so make of that what you will, is leaning a little bit higher scoring. Look, we weigh talent heavily in this thing because normally that's smart. So we lean slightly Bama to cover. I have about 24 hours before I have to pick this game. I lean Alabama. I think I'm maybe more in line with what you're thinking. We'll see where I land. I don't look independent of Bama's defense just going complete all world Saturday and Bama 23-9 being enough. I think you're probably in a fourth quarter decision type game.
It's interesting. So we're releasing our model to everybody on the website, collegefootballnerds.com. We're releasing the model to everybody next week after 4 weeks of data because we don't use priors, we don't use recruiting, and we don't use FCS. But knowing all that, our model actually really, like, I took a peek at it with early data. It really likes Ole Miss because it really likes Tulane. But again, backup quarterback, moved the ball pretty well against Ole Miss. So it'll be interesting to see.